So this is me putting out an all trigger warnings alert. I like dolls, but I love books. Okay, I love dolls too. You got me. Hello out there, all you doll-loving book nerds, and welcome to my channel, where my dolls and I sit and talk about the books we like. Sometimes it's Barbie, sometimes it's Illy, sometimes it's Monster High, sometimes it's a Disney princess, sometimes it's... you get the point. Basically, my dolls and I have our own little book club. My name is Daniel, and I am the Barbie book boy. Today, my co-host and I are going to be talking about a book called Mary, An Awakening of Terror by Nat Cassidy. But I can't do this on my own. I'm codependent and proud of it, so I'm going to need to recruit one of my gal pals here to help me discuss this book. But how to choose? It needs to be someone who's seen injustice. Someone whom the patriarchy has tossed in the trash. Then it hit me like a hot flash in July. My dolls are never gonna be able to love me back. But then I thought, Midge, she's perfect for Mary, An Awakening of Terror by Nat Cassidy. Midge knows better than anyone what it's like to be ignored and invisible. She's been playing second or third fiddle to Barbie for decades, specifically since 1963. So, like Mary, she obviously knows the treachery of being a peri-menopausal woman in a deeply patriarchal society, but don't let her age fool you. Just because she's from 1963 doesn't mean she can't still rock a prom dress. But in true Midge fashion, the dress is a reproduction of Barbie's first senior prom dress from also, I think, 1963. So, typical Midge being forced to suffer the indignity of wearing Barbie's cast-offs. But indignity looks good on her. Just look at this adorable freckle-faced gal with her wide blue eyes and optimistic expression. She has no idea what's in store for her, or for Mary. And speaking of Mary, it would behoove you to heed the warning that Mr. Cassidy included in his author's note, which Midge and I will share with you now. The protagonist, named Mary, which you might have deduced from the title of the book, and by how many times I've said her name so far, is a solitary, middle-aged woman just trying to collect her ceramic figurines, which she calls her loved ones. And I will be appropriating that endearment for my collection of loved ones henceforth. Anyway, Mary's just trying to vibe. She's trying to live her little invisible life and go to the same job at the same bookstore that she's had for decades. You know, I'd like to think Mary would be a big fan of this channel, considering I too have a collection that most people find inappropriate or creepy. And like Mary, I love books. We could have been besties, like a modern day Barbie and Midge, only creepier. Anyway, Mary's self-aware enough to know that she isn't anything particularly remarkable, but she has been going through some fairly remarkable changes lately. She's got some typical symptoms of menopause, like the notoriously infamous hot flashes that you may have heard of. Also some strange, inexplicable things, like not being able to look into a mirror without getting all dizzy and just fainting. Oh, and not to mention the voices in her head, which I don't think is symptomatic of menopause, but what do I know? Anyway, these voices are a bad influence because they keep wanting Mary to lash out and do some horrible things to people. But then, things go from bad to worse when Mary's fired from her job due to being deemed obsolete as far as her young punk of a manager is concerned. And believe me when I say his concern for Mary does not extend very far. So without a plan to support herself and her life in the big city of New York, she's kind of forced to move back home to Arizona, where she hasn't been in decades. But once home, her hallucinations actually escalate, and she starts seeing the terrifying, bloody ghosts of naked, mutilated women all over the place. Like they're chilling in the bathtub and they're hanging out all over town just watching her. And if that isn't creepy enough, a bunch of weird writing keeps appearing in her journal. Her journal is just flooded with completely nonsensical stuff that Mary has absolutely no memory of writing whatsoever. So after some digging, she learns that this writing is actually the secret work of some local, long-dead serial killer from decades ago. And no sooner does she figure this out than the killings start up again. So yeah, big welcome home to Mary. After decades of being gone, what does she find when she comes home but ghosts in her bathtub and local townsfolk being offed right and left? She should have just stayed in New York. So that's Mary, a middle-aged woman stuck trying to fill in the gaps in her memory and figure out who the heck she is after 50 years on this planet. So what are my thoughts? At first, I wasn't sure about this book because it chronicles the experience of a peri-menopausal middle-aged woman, but was written by a cisgendered straight man. And cis straight men don't need any help from us, you know? Besides, I thought we weren't playing that anymore in 2025. But the author does do a good job of addressing the concern of whether or not he has the right to tell this story, both in his author's note and in his afterword at the end of the book. So at least he's aware of the side eye that I'm sure many people have given him since the release of this book. I came to the conclusion that this is sort of his way of sticking it to the patriarchy with a strongly emphatic gesture involving both his middle fingers. Read between the lines. Do I overanalyze? And not to put too fine a point on it, but as an out and proud gay man who plays with dolls, I found his lambasting of the patriarchy absolutely in line with my own ideologies. So I am down with anyone who wants to bash the patriarchy. But does that give him the right to tell the story of women's experiences? I don't know. But I do think it's a fair question. And frankly, it's one that we in the doll community have been grappling with since day one when it comes to the question of women's rights, equality, and the role and impact of fashion dolls on culture. The very existence of these dolls is anathema to many people since the day they first came out. So, like the compulsion to collect and play with fashion dolls, you'll have to make that decision for yourself. If this book and its origins don't sit right with you, I understand that perfectly. I personally came to my own conclusions by asking myself how I would feel if this same author wrote this same story with a middle-aged gay man as its protagonist instead of a woman. And the truth is, for better or worse, from this specific author, because let's face it, not everyone is invited to the barbecue, I think I'd be okay with it because he feels like an ally and his writing felt like allyship. And I don't know if progress happens in a bubble. So, for now, Nat Cassidy is invited to at least my barbecue, but I'll be watching. One whiff of any tomfoolery from him and he's off the list. You hear that, Nat? My dolls and I will be watching. But I can say that the author talks quite a bit about the impact that the book Carrie had on him growing up, which was also written by a cisgendered straight man, insofar as we know anything about these men. I mean, I don't want to assume, but there's not exactly a giant question mark hanging above the heads of either of these men. So I feel like it's at least an innocent assumption, if not a safe one, as to how these men identify. Anyway, Carrie isn't the only book this author was influenced by. Throughout Mary, he references several well-known literary works from Dante's Inferno all the way to Kate Chopin's The Awakening. So at the very least, it seems like Nat has been doing some reading. And I think those influences make sense after reading this book. Mary was an engaging work from the very first page, especially going into it knowing we're going to be sympathetic to her, at least in the beginning. We know she's an underdog. We know her life hasn't been fair. We know she means well and is just trying to be left alone. At least that's how I felt. Considering I'm a middle-aged gay man who spends most Saturday nights sitting at home playing with dolls. Not exactly the status quo stuff of life. And anyway, who among us hasn't felt invisible and discarded due to societal inequity and the persisting patriarchy at some point in our lives? I assume if you're watching my videos. So yeah, like me and my pal Midge, Mary isn't exactly your typical leading lady. And that's the whole point. She's one of us. Well, except for the voices and hallucinations and gory ghosts following her around everywhere she goes. Those aspects and some of her resulting behavior are definitely not for the faint of heart. This book indulges the gore. It indulges some pretty graphic body horror and mutilation in gruesome detail. So this is me putting out an all trigger warnings alert. All trigger warnings are in full effect for the duration of this book. But even with the trigger heavy content, Matt does manage to supply a few moments of levity, particularly as Mary becomes more and more jaded and frustrated with her lot in life and with the mysteries that continuously plague her. So if you find yourself feeling feeling overwhelmed, fear not, for Nat will grant you a brief reprieve with some dark humor. But even much of the dark humor has a particularly triggering bite to it, especially where the character of Mary's aunt is concerned. So you won't be granted much of a reprieve. Don't get too comfortable. It's just a dash. And frankly, that dash is hardly adequate when stacked up against the vivid brutality in this book. There's one scene in this book that I think I blacked out in real time at the actual reading of, because upon reflection, I wasn't even sure I had read what I read, but I wasn't willing to go back and check. It was a lot, Robin. So there you have it. Our thoughts on Mary, An Awakening of Terror by Nat Cassidy. Go forth and read it at your own risk. Thanks so much for watching, and while you're here, you might as well like, comment, and subscribe. Leave a comment for Midge. She doesn't get a lot of fan mail with Barbie as her best friend. It would really make her day. My dolls and I are going to be doing these weekly book reviews, so if that's your thing, then stay tuned. You smell like an old crayon. If you know, you know.